Hello and welcome to the pod. I'm your host, Oscar Hazel. You can follow the show at MiamiPod, the MiamiPod on Twitter and iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, RSS feeds to subscribe to it. Sorry we haven't been away for a while, but the world happens. But more importantly than having the podcast back, we have E113 returning. You can follow NFL Draft Study.net, is it? I've forgotten. It was .weebly.com. So I just remember the Weebly one. And Bleacher Report 1000, where I believe he's doing safeties this year, not cornerbacks.
Doing both.
Okay. And then he'll be doing cornerback charting as always. So today's podcast, we're going to talk about Tannehill and Cutler, because I wanted to wait until Ian came on and to talk about those moves, the 53 cut. And before that, I think we'll touch quickly on week one game against the Bucks being delayed until the bye week, which I believe is week 11. I guess it would have been a harder decision to obviously do that if the Bucks weren't also on a bye week. So that was kind of almost the most fortuitous part for the NFL to kind of work this out. I think it's more would be on the side of business partners and the business side of the Dolphins wanting this and the business side of the NFL wanting this rather than the football side, partly because the Dolphins have already a home game in London, so they were down to 7 home games. They're down to 6. That's quite a lot of revenue lost, probably season ticket holders unhappy, and also like people like Hard Rock who spend a lot of money on getting naming rights for the stadium. If you're losing 2 games out of the season, that's kind of a large amount of exposure gone. So do you just see it the same as where this is more of a business decision rather than a football decision? Because I think most of the players are against it. I think maybe in the long run, it doesn't really matter where your bye week is. Players can get injured anytime, but it's more of a mental break rather than a physical one, which I think most players would feel aggrieved by not having that kind of mental break in the middle of the season.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I have the issue with it just because I think it was more of a money-driven decision. I don't know what they would have done if the 2 teams didn't have the bye week. I think they obviously would have had to force something to an off-site location. I would have liked for them to have gotten a little bit more creative, possibly. Moving the game up to Wednesday, I thought that would have been a good opportunity. Yeah, it trumps your opening night with the Patriots and the Chiefs, but the reality of the situation calls for a different solution. And for me, the loss of the bye week, for me, it's tough on the coaches, it's tough on the players for the reasons that you mentioned, to give them a little bit of a break. I like the late bye week. That's something that just in general, I like to see that. I think that that's an advantage. You get kind of that last push towards the last month of the season. And now that's gone, and really what exacerbates that, and I probably wouldn't feel as strongly as I do if the team didn't go to London. I think that's probably the toughest part of this now. I think that trip is really going to be difficult just because of the jet lag, also just because in general the body clocks. I think that it's as much mental as it is physical, from the way that players kind of talked about it. I just think that it's a distraction in general, and then not having that bye week is only going to, especially depending on how the team is going at that point. If the team's hot, then maybe you'd say that maybe we don't want a bye week, but it could also slide to the other direction too. If they're kind of up and down, or if they're really struggling at some point, you kind of want that bye week as a buffer to end kind of that a little bit of a tough streak in case you do run into one. So I thought it's just unfortunate that they decided to go that direction. I thought it was very predictable that that's what they were going to do. I thought that either moving it to a different direction, to a different location on Sunday, or even making it a Monday night game, I thought those were going to be better options than what they chose. But
I guess the issue with a Monday night game is they're having to travel to LA for week 2. The Bucks only go to Chicago, so still kind of a bit of a travel, and they're not too close together, so you couldn't just have both teams go out to LA, say, to have the game. The interesting thing with the London game is it's, I think, the first time a team hasn't had a bye week after their London game. So perhaps if there was a bye week after the London game, they wouldn't have been able to move it either. But I think the team had not had a bye week in the second half of the season for a long time. Generally, they've had it week 4 and 5 the last couple of years, whether that's due to other London games or just kind of how the rotation goes, and the London games kind of skewing that. So I think those all kind of play into it. It's just kind of like the worst case scenario. And maybe they just felt like this season's kind of gone down the pan. It's just like, it's obviously not worked out like how they wanted it. Quarterback position with the injury to Tannehill. And so maybe they were just like, oh, let's just kind of get the season over with and just not try and like force more things. Just because I think like you could even argue that not having a 4 weeks preparation and having to force ahead your scheduling, that's as much of an injury risk to a player to not have their 4 week preparation and suddenly have to escalate preparation or not have like a rest day or a half day before your opener, potentially, and like short notice, potentially that could be as negatively affecting on players otherwise. And maybe this is a good opportunity for the coaching staff to like scout the Chargers for week 2 and scout the Jets and Saints, the upcoming games. And that's somewhere where we've seen Gase and this coaching staff struggle with is that in-game, in pre-game scouting report. The first quarter, they really struggled. So maybe this is an opportunity for the coaching staff to kind of have a little bit more time where all they can focus on really is that first week. It is also interesting for, in terms of contracts with veterans, 4-year players, if they're signed after the first week, they don't have any guaranteed money on their contract. So it's kind of interesting position now where the Dolphins almost have kind of like an extra week of training camp where they can bring in veterans after, I believe it's Monday, you can start bringing, maybe Tuesday you can start bringing in veterans on 1 week contracts basically and try them out for a couple of days. So that could be quite interesting, particularly in positions like maybe linebackers, they're still trying to rejigger after the loss of McMillan, or maybe at guard positions where they're probably at their weakest. Is there anything else on kind of like how this alters the schedule in your opinion?
Not really. Some people are pointing out that, they didn't used to have bye weeks, which was at this point almost 30 years ago, that they didn't have bye weeks. But I think in general, it's a poor look for a league that's saying player safety. I think that the overall excuse of, well, now they can be home with their families or they can be with their families, I think that's pretty weak. I think that's almost just like a weird cop-out. Their families are going to evacuate South Florida, whether they're with the player, if they move the game to a different site, or they're just going back to wherever they're from. Because a lot of these folks aren't from South Florida. So, like, it's just weird excuses being thrown around, weird justification. I just wish the league would come out and say, we're concerned about the revenue that we would make from this game if we didn't move it. Like,
maybe
I would
it's
just
because
respect
it was the
that.
Dolphins side who said that, and they don't want the kind of the business side to be at loggerheads with the football side.
Yeah.
So maybe it's the NFL like trying to appease, like not make that kind of an issue.
Yeah.
And it may not be the Dolphins; it may be their business partners, or the Dolphins not wanting to upset their business partners. And,
yeah, there's definitely politics in play all around, and it's never an easy decision. That's why it takes a little while to figure that stuff out. But
I will say it's kind of rich people saying like, "Oh, look how unhappy the players are about this." Yet we saw so many people bemoan Tannehill for not having knee surgery, and like it's more his right to decide not to have a knee surgery if he's being told he can rehab it than players moaning about like when they get their week of holiday off.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's kind of like people just pick and choose like when the argument suits. And it's like, I'm sure if like the Dolphins get destroyed by the Patriots after the Bucks game, people will be bemoaning the change. But I mean, or if like someone gets injured during that Bucks game, but I mean, some could get injured against the Chargers and no one will say anything. So everyone always like picks the arguments that are easy. I mean, people are going to get injured every week in football. Like people get injured during bye weeks. That's just the reality of that. Or like, what was it? David Garrard in the hot tub can get injured everywhere. We'll move on to the 53 cuts before we get more into the quarterback stuff. I guess the interesting one where is maybe the biggest surprise of the cut was Neville Hewitt, but it was with an injury designation. So we'll see if he returns any time. And that kind of makes more sense with the Ray Maaluga signing. Shall we start with like the happy kind, the people were happy, like made it? I guess you were pretty surprised that like Fade wasn't traded. But I thought he probably had the strongest preseason of all the defensive linemen. Like Suhan Wait took it pretty easy. Godchaux was okay, but I think that was just against expectation. He wasn't like phenomenal, and people kind of comparing him to Jordan Phillips, which is like, of course you're going to look good. Although they were kind of playing the opposite positions they should be all preseason. It sounds like now they're going to rotate that when they actually start, and Phillips will be the base nose tackle, but Godchaux will be a nickel, so he'll actually play more, even though he won't be the starter. I guess the other two in particular that I was impressed with was Perry, the running back. I thought he looked really good, and Eric Smith, the right tackle. I thought he was pretty impressive, especially in the second level. And I think he's not going to maybe challenge for a spot early on, but I think if we see James perform like he did early last season, there's someone that could potentially like take his spot for a week or two. And maybe you look forward to that fifth year of Juwan James's his rookie scale extension. That fifth year is only guaranteed for injury, so he could potentially be cut. That money he doesn't have to be paid. So Eric Smith in the next year or so can prove he's as capable as Juwan James, which is not a terribly high bar. And Eric Smith definitely brings a lot more in the run game. And if Juwan James kind of can't recover as much with his length, he's not really that useful as a pass protector. And we've talked about this a million times, but he's a really hard player to build a line around, or a hard player to kind of think of conceptually as like a finesse right tackle. You don't see many of them in the league. Did any of, I guess Jakeem Grant was like pretty impressive as well, like his body control, like really physical at the catch point, which is like impressive. I guess he was playing against pretty low competition, which would be like the caveat. But was there anyone else that stood out, or out of those players, like particular aspects of their game that was impressive? I thought Perry's vision and patience was really good as well.
Yeah, I liked Perry's toughness too. He looked like a guy that was eager to run hard, you know, and especially in the preseason. I know he was battling for a roster spot, but you don't always see that. You know, it's not always something that it's more of a trait, and that's something that you'll consistently see. I had no expectations from him, and I really liked what I saw. Jakeem Grant, like you mentioned, he looked like a totally different player than what we saw at receiver last year. I remember a year ago we were talking about this guy looked totally lost at the position. Thought he had, you know, next to no potential impact in the immediate future. Had to learn the position. Looked like a totally different person out there, just as far as his confidence, his ability to track the ball. I remember he lost a deep ball last year, and it's a super small sample size. But I think
most of his catches were coming back to the ball, and not like, I think he caught one in stride. So that's more on the quarterback than him. But it's still, that's maybe like another caveat. It's like we need to see him like catching balls in stride and at like more of a velocity, whereas they're just kind of like floaty prayers, almost underthrown quite most of the time. But still, to be able to like at his size to get up that high over defenders, even though the defenders aren't looking at the ball. Six railings. It was definitely like a surprise to see him be that, to have that aspect in his game. And it's like, I think Josh Norris always talks about it. It's like you can be big, but if you don't play big, it doesn't matter, and you can be small and like not play small. And I think we saw him like play big, which is really positive.
Yeah.
I
Yeah, I
guess he
mean,
kind of was helped as well by like opportunity of like some wide receivers going down.
for sure, for sure. But he made the most, and he was a guy that I honestly didn't think he would make the roster after
I
the
guess the
the
negative
training
with him
camp
is
reports.
returning was not that
Yep,
great.
exactly. That's where my concern is that I don't know that he brings any value there right now. I think I would use Kenyon Drake as the primary return man. I think Drake is a little bit more consistent, especially with drops. And I think Landry will probably see back there too again.
Yeah, and
For
probably
also
Perry
for
as well, and
yeah,
kind of see everyone.
I don't think I'd really use Grant back there unless if like I really need a big play right here and we're just desperate to try it because I think he's as prone to a turnover as he is even a decent gain. But if he can develop as a receiver, that's great. And I thought that maybe Demore Stringfellow would maybe stick as the sixth receiver. We saw Isaiah Ford go down with an injury very early, so he wasn't really able to get into that mix. But I was a little bit surprised they didn't keep a sixth receiver. Instead, they kept an extra cornerback, which that's fine. Again, it comes down to special teams evaluation on that, so that's fine. But I was happy with Grant. I was really happy with Eric Smith. I'm glad that you talked about him. Really liked what he brought in the run game. Really like how he moves. He's a guy that I'd like to see them develop his body a little bit, become a little bit more impactful at the point of contact. That's generally what these type of players struggle to get better at. You see these guys move really well, but as soon as they create that contact, they're not able to really hold their block and they're not really able to occupy their man. They don't have to bulldoze him over. We don't need to see pancakes from him. We just need to be able to see a guy who can maintain his gap without the defender gaining leverage on him. And I think that that's something that, as his body improves, will hopefully be where his growth is. Because if it is, and if he grows there, I think that that's really a good candidate to cut some salary next year on James, depending on how James plays. Jesse Davis, he was another guy. He was kind of like Godchow. He got a lot of talk up in training camp. I thought Davis played all right. I thought, especially as a depth piece, it's a nice player. I'm not sure yet about starting upside. Part of that's limited tape. Part of that's limitation of preseason tape. We don't get the all 22, but what I saw was nice, especially as a guy that they haven't invested into. So it's not like they put in a draft pick. I thought that he was more impressive than Asiata. Asiata to me showed a lot of the same struggles that I saw in college, kind of falling over himself as he's getting uphill. Still extremely strong. The strength definitely showed when he was able to get his hands on a guy, but overall I have some concerns with his movement ability and an ability to kind of continue blocking upfield when that's his game. Like that needs to be where he wins, and I don't know that he did a great job of that.
And with Asiata, like we always, I thought that maybe they're moving to more like the gap scheme, but no, they're all outside zone. It's like
Yeah.
Gase has to be pressed to talk about anything other than outside zone in press conferences. It's like pretty clear, and like just watching games, it's all outside zone, more so than last year. And last year was 50% outside zone, 20% inside zone, and like 10% gap, and the rest is like scrambles and stuff. It's like it's an outside zone running scheme.
Yeah.
And Asiata just doesn't fit that. And um,
What were your thoughts on? And yeah, I'll touch on Fade really quick. Fade, I thought played amazing. He looked awesome. I'm glad that they didn't trade him because I would love for them to keep him. I'm as another team, his performance really just stood out though. Like if I was another team, I probably would have offered like a fourth round pick for Miami, um, because that's probably if they lose him and don't spend in free agency, which if they have money in free agency, they're going to try to spend every dollar of it. That's clear that that's what they're back to. Um, if they don't
he's
sign
going to be a
anybody,
really
they're gonna,
interesting free agent next year.
yeah, like I feel like he'll be really under the radar, almost like Jabal Sheard was, until the Patriots got him, and then Sheard goes and signs a pretty lucrative deal.
Yeah,
Fade, I mean, he was to me the best defensive end besides Wake that I saw on this team in the preseason, and that's saying something considering William Hayes played like a grown ass man all throughout the preseason, and his strength was just dominating second teams, which you expect because he's a veteran. But like, it's just one of those eye jarring things that when you see like this rotational starter or like borderline starters playing backups, that's like, oh, holy crap, like that's a huge talent difference even in the NFL. So the day was super impressive though. What did you think about Charles Harris's preseason?
I think he just kind of looked like what I expected to. I don't think he's going to have as big an impact as people were kind of maybe assuming after he got drafted. But I mean, there was nothing where I thought his his positives of his game didn't show up. I think his first step still looks quick, and that would be like the question for most people. It's like, oh, he didn't test well. Is his first step just like jumping? I think you still saw him get off the line pretty well. He just needs to like improve his pad level a little bit. But I think every player needs to do that. Like no one's Cameron Wake, and that's kind of always an issue I have to deal with. Is like watching Cameron Wake so often. You kind of expect everyone to be able to get to 45 degrees, and that's just not physically possible.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything in particular? I feel he played against a run much better than I think anyone really expected.
Yeah,
So
I agree. Especially like from the start to the end of the preseason, I thought he looked a lot more comfortable against the run. Like especially awareness wise, I thought that he was locating the ball and reading the play a lot better. Like you saw week one, he was going around the pocket on run plays, and then they started to run draws towards his side of the field, just like in college. And he was just totally out of the play. By the end of the preseason, he was much more balanced, I think, with his approach. I was also surprised how many double and triple teams he garnered. I don't know if that's just preseason poor planning
yeah,
and teams just trying
because
weird
God
stuff.
Chow was getting double teams the whole time, and like no team is going to like every single team because Miami don't flip their defensive tackles. Every single team is going to move their strength to their right side so that they double team Sue. Because it was like Sue and Wake getting single teams and Godchild getting double teams as well. So I
It
think
was
that's just
definitely
teams like lining up their vanilla stuff against vanilla stuff.
yeah, it was definitely just funny to see though.
Yeah.
Like there was the time I think it was the Ravens. They had the tight end, the back on his side of the field, plus the left tackle, and they all go to chip him.
Oh, wasn't it like yeah? It was like 12. It was like fullback tight end. Like I think that was a
Yeah,
mistake. I
yeah,
think that was just like
it was
fucking
hilarious
up.
though. I mean, like selfishly, I wish it was because Harris is so good. I mean, obviously, look, you're only going to do that for like four players in the NFL, which
Yeah,
teams don't even really do that. But like
yeah.
Wake would obviously be the guy. But it was just funny to see. Harris in general, I thought his play strength was very good. I think he is pretty advanced as far as his strength. Um, Again, pad level, I would totally agree with that. He did get sledded a couple of times, and he also got put out of his hole a couple of times, and that's going to happen, especially with his pad issues that he had in college. So hopefully that continues to improve. I want to see a little bit more of his speed rush. I want to see that work a little bit more effectively. I thought he went to the bull rush a little bit too often, but again, maybe that's something that they're working with him on. So overall, I liked what he did in the preseason, even though he didn't really have any stats to back it up. I thought his film was pretty firm. Um, Last guy I will touch on is the cornerback duo. I really liked what Alteron Burner and Cordrea Tankersley did in the preseason. I thought those two were really strong, especially Tankersley. This is a guy I had a second round grade on. I thought that even in like the mid to late third was a real value in this corner class. To me, he looked ready to play, and the stats really backed it up. But I thought the film was really impressive. He looked very confident coming back towards the line of scrimmage. Looked a lot more fluid than I think people gave him credit for. I'm interested in seeing how often they rotate him in during the regular season, because I think that they're going to kind of rotate Werner and Maxwell more than Tankersley, but I think that at some point you kind of want to get Tankersley some snaps because I think he's going to be the cornerback of the future of this team. But Werner
I
played
think
well
with
too.
Vernon Maxwell and Howard's injury history, I think Tanksy is going to see the field more
That's,
likely than not.
that's true, and they did keep Walt Aikens as well, which was an interesting.
Yeah, I was just about to ask about that. And like after his move back to corner and not keeping Jordan Lucas, who I would say Lucas is a better special teams player,
Yeah,
or at least he plays. Like we've got like Akins is more of a vice guy, whereas I think Lucas is a pretty good gunner, and I would say Miami have more vice guys than gunners. Um, So that's why I always had Lucas over Akins. And then not just, I guess both of them have kind of like flip flopped between safety and corner position in Miami. So it was just interesting Akins going back to corner and then keeping a spot, but maybe it's more special teams than
It's
actual play wise.
interesting too because they're a little bit different at corner and safety too. Because Aiken's a little bit more of the free safety and outside corner, whereas I think Lucas was a little bit more of a slot and strong safety.
Yes, and maybe that's just with all the safeties they brought in who are more box safeties, and then Werner joining Bobby McCain as like potential slot players. So maybe it was more the Werner acquisition that kind of pushed Lucas out.
Do you when TJ McDonald comes back, do you think he's taking Torrey McTyre's place on the roster, or maybe someone else's? I mean, I know that's a long ways away, but
yeah, I mean, we'll see who's injured. It could be, maybe we'll see like what happens to the linebacker position as well. I could potentially see them take someone out there, just the amount they play with two linebackers. But yeah, I guess McTyre would be kind of the obvious choice to take out.
What were your thoughts on Maurice Smith, the safety? Because to be honest, I just don't really have any takeaways from him, from his play for some reason. I don't even like remember him doing much. And that's not saying that he didn't. I just don't remember him doing much.
My opinion on like the 53 cuts is like there's 50 players I think should be on the roster, and then it's like just which three you want added on. So like I almost just don't like, to me the three I would have probably take off are like McTyre, Smith, and Chase Allen.
Yeah.
When I've signed Ray Maluga either. But like I don't really care who you put on for those guys.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree.
That was kind of like my opinion of the roster, how it was.
I agree. I think those would be my bottom three players. Do you know anything about Justin March Lillard from the Chiefs? I don't know anything about him. Weak side, strong side linebacker from the Chiefs.
No, I didn't. I can't recall him. I don't think he played at all. I think he was on the practice squad most of the season for the Chiefs, or like didn't play much.
Yeah, he's an undersized guy. He's kind of like Jatavius Brown's, like same size from Akron. So like that's why I brought that comp. So Brown's currently with the Chargers. He's been balling out with the Chargers, but so he's 5'11", 226. So he's definitely an undersized guy. Looks like he was a free agent in 2015. He went to the injured reserve 2 straight years, but he was reactivated in December of 2016 for Kansas City, and then they waived him. So yeah, so he never played in game action. So I'm guessing that he's probably the 52nd or 53rd man on the roster.
Yeah, I think maybe he's more like special teams than anything else. But I mean,
and if Hewitt gets healthy, that you'd probably see them swap. You'd probably cut him and get Hewitt in.
We could talk about kickers and punters, but I don't know if we want to.
No, I'm good on that.
But if you didn't know, Cody Parker,
Parkey,
then he was with the Eagles and then Cleveland, right?
Yeah.
And then Matt Hack beat out
Matt Darr,
who I thought Matt Darr was pretty good. I think that's maybe more looking towards like the next 3-4 years rather than this year financially, because he'll be up for an extension soon. So they probably were like, he's pretty comparable. We'll just go with the guy that's going to be cheaper for the next 4 years and have to think about paying Darr.
One thing on Parkey too, he was basically the reason the Dolphins won against the Browns because he missed a field goal, but then he got a lot better. Right after that, he played a lot better than that. So he's helped the Dolphins hopefully in multiple ways. Helped them get to the playoffs last year, and he's going to aim to do that again this year. And he's a Dolphins fan, grew up a Dolphins fan. I think that was our friend Antoine Staley that got that information. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was him.
Is there anyone who was disappointed in their performance over preseason? I guess for me, not just because of his play, but also his usage would be Julius Thomas. Like Gase brought up when he signed him, like that he was used a lot more in line than he was with Denver and Jacksonville, and that was one area that they were like liked about him. But then they also signed Anthony Fasano, like play, if you want to have someone in line, play the guy who's good in line, which is Anthony Fasano, and just don't play Julius Thomas. But Julius looked awful. Fasano looked better in like both aspects of the game, both like catching, running routes, and blocking. So personally, I would have Fasano over Thomas, but yeah, Thomas just looks bad. And I'd say like Tunsil didn't look great. He looked a bit top heavy and wasn't moving that great. But maybe they're kind of trying to get him in a position where he has his weight on early and then kind of plays his way into shape. That could be the plan. Some teams have done that with young tackles before as well. Particularly like when you're running an outside zone scheme, you're going to be asking him to run sidelines a lot, and he's skilled enough to kind of take edge linemen all the way to the very edge of the sidelines. He's going to be exerting more than kind of the average tackle. But on offense, at least, I thought those two were. I think. Well, I had low expectations for Thomas, but it's like that was always in the back of your mind. Oh, maybe like Gase is going to use him properly and he'll get down and weight. But no, they're going to try and use him as like an inline tight end when really he's just the big slot receiver.
Yeah, I agree. I thought he was so bad, I probably would have cut him.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see what they're going to get from him. I would have rather have had Marquise Gray and Fasano getting those snaps and then using Duarte in that role that Thomas should be in. Because, I mean, I highlighted it back-to-back plays. He was destroyed as a blocker. Yeah, he's never been a strong blocker. And the point of that video that I had wasn't to say that, oh, like, he can get, like, he's not going to get better. At his age, he's never been a good blocker, but they're asking him to be a blocker, whether it to be as a dummy or not, because they were not asking him to be a dummy throughout the preseason. He was making key blocks and he was getting destroyed on a majority of those blocks. That's a major issue if that's going to be a usage thing throughout the season.
Players can't always help what they're bad at, but coaches can.
Right. And so I'm not blaming Thomas that he's being asked to do that. He's in a role that's just not what he can do. And then as a receiver, you know, what we saw in that touchdown was that's a schemed open touchdown that any tight end can play. Any tight end can do that. So why you're paying $6 million?
Overvalued the first couple of seasons of Deion Sims, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, he had a couple weird, awkward-looking plays with Chicago this preseason too. But for Thomas, you know, a lot of what he brought to the table, we saw it on a pick six that Miami had too. He's got to win on those shorter routes. He has to use his big frame that he has to box out corners. And another play that I showed was him losing on that. Well, that's where his value is. If he's not winning on those few plays, on those few receptions, there's really no value to him. And I think with their cap situation right now, I think that they're going to look back at the end of this year and say, we really could have used that money elsewhere to upgrade this roster, not only maybe in an extension or also just for this year, because ultimately I was probably the least impressed with what I saw out of him this preseason.
Defensively, any concerning performances? I guess like most people would probably look at like the stats of the D line and be worried, but I think we know what we're getting from Sun Wake, and they're just kind of, they played a lot, which was maybe the more concerning thing. I don't know why they played so many snaps, which is strange considering the beginning of last season, Gase barely wanted to play Wake in the first month of the actual season. So he's kind of gone the opposite way round and kind of feels like he's playing him too much in games that don't matter.
I do, and I also do echo your Laramie Tunsil thoughts too. That's really kind of on defense. Maxwell situation, they seem so eager to want to replace him, and I will say that if there are communication issues, and we saw, I think, maybe a couple last year, and it's hard for us to know on the outside, but usually if they come back and clarify, or if we at some point see clarification or hear clarification, that helps. And we got that. And especially in that Philadelphia game, it's easy to point to with the Wentz touchdown, where I'm not sure that Wentz actually read Rashad Jones extremely well, even though he pointed it out that he did after the game. I almost think he just kind of made like a lucky guess. because Maxwell shouldn't have passed him off. And there was some confusion there. I actually think there were multiple broken reads on that. Rashad Jones comes down to guard the flat. Maxwell should have carried the receiver Torrey Smith upfield and continued covering him. It looks like he was in man. And it looks like it was just a broken play where Maxwell continued to play in zone, and Jones, instead of falling back deep, had made his read, so he ends up being wide open Torrey Smith. Communication issues and trust issues, that's going to be something that is more of an issue than a talent issue, I think, for Maxwell, and I understand that, but at the same time, I don't really understand why there's communication breakdowns back there. Matt Burke was here last year. I don't really understand.
The scheme's exactly the same.
Yeah, like I don't know. So maybe
and they're playing like vanilla looks. They're not like changing. There's not being like adjustments made pre-snap by either the offense or defense. It's
bizarre. It's bizarre, and I don't. And Burke really seemed to call out Maxwell, and there was a big deal about it after the game because it's just like last year. What was it, like week 4, week 5 when they benched Maxwell? They made a big deal out of it. All the beat writers made a big deal. Oh, there's a starting job at cornerback up for grabs, and then we never really heard about it after that. So I don't know if Miami's just continually trying to motivate Maxwell. I don't know if it's a football IQ issue. I don't know what the issue is, but
I think the Dolphins do have like a problem with at least with this stuff is like player motivation. I think we saw with Ajayi, like they kind of fell into Ajayi working out. Like they didn't motivate him in the proper way. Like he wasn't good because he was benched that first week. He was worse because they didn't realize, oh, he should be the starting running back. Foster should be the relief back for him. But they wanted him to react in a certain way, and they might want Maxwell to react in a certain way. But yeah, maybe they're just like bad at reading certain players, and or maybe they, like we saw at the beginning of Gase's first tenure, like bigging up Maxwell as being like a number one corner, shutdown corner, and great learning experiences for the wide receivers to go down against a lockdown man corner, even though he plays zone all the time. So maybe they thought, oh, that didn't work, we'll do the opposite.
Yeah,
and it kind of worked last year where there's the benching, so like, oh, we'll just like tell him he's bad.
Yeah, and the NFL, I think in general is pretty bad at that. You hear that out of like when you hear stuff about prospects, about like their personalities and stuff. Usually, like Deshaun Kaiser is probably like the best example of this from the last year. When you hear stuff about like their character, usually that just means that they're not that
they're not a jigsaw piece.
Yeah, like they're not like a super jock. Like maybe they're just a little bit more of an introvert, or maybe they're just not into like going to all the parties and stuff like that. Like it's really weird. Like they just have different personalities. It's almost more like the NBA, where like the NBA is much more fluid with personalities, and they're much more accepting of different personalities. Football, I don't think, has that same culture about it, and I think the NFL really has a bad grasp on that, and you see that with like scouts and stuff, like anonymous scouts. Stuff like that, those quotes, usually that's all it is. Like you're used to seeing a certain type of player and athlete, and if they're not that mold, then we don't like them. So I don't know what it is with Maxwell. I'll say
and also
this.
Just like football front offices and scouting departments are predominantly white, or if not white, like Christian males. Like it's and who've been around football their entire life. So it's like they have a very narrow mind of what like humans are. So I guess that's like one reason why like they want to have one type of person they can relate to, because that makes their life easier. If they don't have to treat every human differently, they can just treat every human the same. That makes like the process of running 53 human beings much easier if they all have the same mental makeup and you can treat them all the same and just see them as numbers, not as names and people.
I think most interestingly to me was that the Dolphins at least made an offer to Joe Hayden, and I'm pretty sure that would have come at the expense of Maxwell. I think they would have cut Maxwell to open space. Oh yeah, easily.
Better, cheaper.
Yeah, he's healthier. which is
I
saying
wonder
something.
if that's just like because Pouncey was out on it, and like I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that Hayden can do better than what he did in Cleveland, but he's also a shell of himself from 4 years ago. So like that upside is pretty limited, and he was really expensive. 7 million the first year, 10 million the second year. Now they can cut him, but they're going to face, I think, 3 or 4 million of dead cap next year if they cut him, which is pretty significant. So Miami, with almost next to nothing with cap space this year, they were the move would have had to have been cutting Maxwell to sign Hayden. So interesting, and I think that worked out for Miami in a very good way because I cannot imagine Miami playing as much cover three as they did last year with Joe Hayden, because I've seen that story the last couple of years with Cleveland, and trust me, it ends very poorly.
Maybe it's just the front office like keep hearing coaches or media say that they like have man corners. It's like, oh, we'll get the man corners even though they never play man.
So it's a weird dynamic.
Yeah, I don't know. Should we get on to quarterback position then?
Sure.
So what did you? How should we start talking about this? I don't really know. It feels like it's so long ago.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
I've kind of like said my piece on like the Tannehill, like the knee part in his decision to not have the surgery. I don't think it should be the football team's decision whether a human should have what should happen to someone's knee. I mean, that should be the decision of a human, regardless of like whatever it is, and like the long-term health of players is more important than like short-term career aspirations or goals. So I think that's like something where I just seem like, oh, the team mismanaged this completely. It's like, well, it shouldn't be the team that in the first place that makes the decision on someone's knee. In the same way, we're seeing a lot of players retire. Like who was the player that almost retired and then got talked out of it?
Oh, Sua Cravens.
Yeah, that's scary.
Yeah.
Like he should, like teams should not be allowed to do that. Like,
Yeah.
if a player wants to retire, like a team, like that's like messed up. And in like 30 years, if Sue Cravens has like brain injuries, like or like so, like I don't know, it just gets like super messed up.
Yeah. No, I
Because
agree.
the team's not going to be responsible for Sue Cravens in 30 years.
I'll say that I agree to an extent. I do think that it's a difficult line because where it gets tricky is that the team can put pressure because of contract status. And maybe and it's hard to know. Maybe Tannehill felt this pressure from his agent. Maybe he felt it from the team. Next year is when the team can basically release him for nothing. So next year, I'm very confident he'll be back on the team next year. I'm extremely confident, actually. If everything is going well with the rehab, that's going to be, a proposition that there are wild card factors in there. We don't know what's going to happen, but the team has been very supportive of him privately and publicly. And that's going to continue. We're going to continue to see that. Even if Cutler has an amazing year this year, regardless of that, the team is going to be very supportive of him, at least for 2018. Now, when it comes down to the decision, I agree. It's definitely in the players' court. They did their work. They found that a non-surgical option was potentially the right choice. It is what it is. Going back to when the injury happened, I erred more on the sides of the surgery, and I think that it ended up working out that way. But you don't know. And from Tannehill's perspective, it was, if I can play 16 games this year and if I play well, then I have no issue. I have nothing to worry about. I'm going to continue to be the quarterback of this team, probably finish out my contract, and maybe get a new contract. Things get a little bit dicier when you start to look at it the other way. Well, if I miss half of this season, I come back rusty, I'm 80%, and I maybe play 2 or 3 games healthy, well, then the Pandora's box is open, and you don't know what's going to happen then. And that's fair too. So it's extremely difficult. I don't think there is really a right answer. I would have liked for him to get surgery earlier, but they were told of options that were non-surgical. And so I understand it. It's upsetting to me because I would have liked to have seen the team push him in the direction of surgery. But you have to follow in the opinion of medical professionals, and obviously James Andrews is one of the best in the world. So it's unfortunate. Look, he could have gotten the surgery. He could come back from this surgery and get injured on the first play again. So we don't know. I mean, things happen. Weird stuff happens.
And
I hope,
like players have non-contact knee injuries all the time.
yeah,
And like the turf, we saw the turf look really bad at Miami Stadium in preseason. Who knows what the training facility is like, but it was outside. Like maybe like I don't know, maybe like the amount of rain or something that week was a part of the issue as well. Should we move on to Cutler then?
yeah.
And I guess should we start with like the idea that he had his best season under Gase and what that meant him having his best season under Gase? Because to me, like watching him play for Gase, and the thing that was interesting with Gase coming to Miami, looking at that Bears offense is like the staggering difference in pace. And I know lots of people have been saying how like quick in preseason the offensive looked. That's because they're not doing anything in the line of scrimmage. It's like they run up, the play's already made, and then just throwing to the first read. In what Cutler actually did in Chicago is like wait behind the line of scrimmage for a long time to work out what to run. And then it was like a lot of screens, a lot of dump offs. His best games were like the Rams, where I think there was 3 plays that went for 200 yards and he threw 10 yards in the air. Like they threw so many, like that was his best game was the Rams game, and he just like dumped it off a bunch of times. And so it's interesting to me, like people bigging up Cutler as being a good quarterback, when the reason why he had his best year is because Gase basically took away him from being a quarterback. Like he basically like neutered him. I was like, no, you're just going to play like really conservatively. Like they were behind a lot. Their pace was actually faster when they were ahead, which is a really bizarre stat, especially for a team that was not ahead in many games. So maybe that's kind of the issue. But they won 6 games. Like, yeah, it was a bad team, but Gase was Cutler was a large factor in them being bad. And like lots of people say, like Alshon Jeffrey was out to load that Rams game he was in and didn't throw downfield at all. He threw a bunch of screens. Like he was played for 8 games. Cutler didn't throw deep. He's like has lost significant velocity on his deep ball, and he's not exactly coming in as a beacon of health either. He like played 6-7 games last season. Torn labrum, which has its own issues, and especially an aging quarterback. It's like I think you said he's like Matt Moore is 80% of him. I think that's probably being maybe kind to Matt Moore. I think Matt Moore's bad, but I think like I don't think Matt Moore should like ever start.
Well, I don't either.
They're similar in terms of like they will like throw a bad deep ball into contested area and it'll be underthrown. A wide receiver makes a good catch, and then suddenly they're like a good deep throwing quarterback. But really, they just threw a bad ball and like someone else made the play. I think we saw that with like the Devontae Parker like almost touchdown and stuff in preseason.
Yep, I would agree. Yeah, I mean, I went back and I charted that whole 2015 season and basically, said the same thing. 36% accurate on deep balls. That's almost 20% less accurate than Tannehill last year. He had 6 dropped interceptions. So people will cite, well, he was a more careful and more efficient quarterback. Well, he was also lucky. And even if 4 out of those 6 would have been caught, which is a little bit closer to what you would expect. I mean, every quarterback has dropped interceptions, but 6 is a lot. Yeah. 6 is a high percentage for how many throws he had. He had
and especially when you're throwing like within 10 yards most of the time as well.
Yeah, and actually that was another thing too that I'll get to. But his interception rate would have been the highest of his career with Gase if he would have had regular luck. So let's say even half of those, it would have been almost his career high. If he had had more than half of those caught, it would have been his career high. So he was still making as many reckless plays despite the lower amount of attempts. Then we get into average depth of target. Now, he was missing Alshon Jeffrey for 8 games, and so that is probably part of it, although his numbers accuracy-wise were not better with Jeffrey. It's fair to probably say he probably would have been a little bit more aggressive with Jeffrey, and he'll probably be a little bit more aggressive with Miami because they have better downfield receivers. I think that's a fair point. But he was going deep less often than Tannehill did. About one, it's not much, about 1% over the course of a season. But so it's a very small amount, but it's still notable considering the narratives. And also, I was talking to Kian Fahey about this. Cutler would have ranked, I think, 30th out of 32 quarterbacks with the amount of throws that he had past 10 yards. If his 2015 numbers were to be compared to the 2016 numbers. The reason why that is that's because those are the numbers that he had available. So he was basically what we think Alex Smith is. He was poor at throwing the deep ball, and he was having to throw checkdowns and to the running backs every play. Now he does it with a good arm, yeah, but he's also reckless with the football. And he has a lot of fumbles as well. That's another concern too. Like Tannehill had that same issue where if he's getting hit blindside, chances are pretty decent he's going to fumble that football and put it on the ground. So that's going to stay the same with him. And he's also now 34 and coming off a torn labrum. And I think it's fair to say that he didn't want to come back and play football this year until he got a $10 million paycheck. I think that's another concern here too. Do you have a guy that's really motivated that if this team starts struggling and maybe they're looking at a losing record, what are you going to get out of him as far as effort? He basically said he's here for one last paycheck. So I don't know, man. I think it was the right decision because this team is old and it's built to win right now. They're one of the older leagues and the older teams in the league.
Do you think it's built to win now? I don't know about that.
I think they believe that they are built to win now. And if you look at the money spent,
I think that's the bigger. I can.
Yeah, because if you go check out Over the Cap, Jason Ferguson does a great job over there. You can check him out on Twitter. He posted this the other day. It was basically comparing all the teams with what they're built to win now in terms of cap and age and their reliance on young players. Miami was towards the upper end of being built to win now because of what they're spending and because of their age.
That's partly due to not retaining drafts.
It is. It is. There's definitely some flaw there, but the team has been built like we've seen Mike Tannenbaum teams built before. Yeah. So there's noise in there. There's
bad drafting. It kind of compounds as well.
There's definitely noise in there. So take that for what it is. But I think in general it's a pretty fair snapshot of where they think this team is, because otherwise you don't go get Jay Cutler. If you don't think that this team is going to win right now, you don't go get Jay Cutler. I don't see why you would. I think they'll be a competitive team. I think they're very similar to last year. A deeply flawed team. The offensive line is probably worse, depending on what Juwan James is right now. If Juwan James is, his rookie self, then okay. And if Laramie Tunsil is better than what we saw in preseason, okay. Then we're working with something a little bit there, but we still have two atrocities at guard, and that's going to be limiting. So, ultimately, I think this is going to be a team in the same range. And was it worth it to have those cap ramifications? I don't know. I don't know. They're going to be in the mix to get, I think, in the same spot they were last year, because I think the schedule is fairly favorable in general. I think they're going to be between 7 and 9 wins because there's not much of a difference there. I mean, that's a missed field goal. That's a fumble. That's a kickoff return for touchdown. So the margin, we saw it last year, the margins all went in Miami's favor last year. I think there were 8-1 or something in close games. If they don't have that same luck, are they a 7-win team? They might be. I think they downgraded at quarterback. They did the best that they could maybe at quarterback.
I think Kaepernick's a better fit to better.
I agree, especially if they run that same offense. But
and that's the funny thing where people be like, "Oh well, Cutler's familiar with the offense," and like Gase, it's more Gase knows him, and just like like football's ancestral. We see that all the time. That's why we can like predict like quite without really knowing anything, like who our staff members are going to be interested in. Like the reason why Clyde Christensen is with Miami is because both him and Gase know Peyton Manning. Like football is super ancestral. It's like, well, I know this one player and he might not be as good as Kaepernick, but I know him, so we'll just get him. And that's the reality of it. And more than anything, but I think Kaepernick is like substantially better, has far better upside. If you actually want to have like a competition next year with Tannehill, like Kaepernick offers that. He's a deeply flawed player as well. Like he can't roll to the left and throw. Like it's always been a problem going back to Arizona. Like he really struggles throwing across his body. But you can scheme for that, and he's like every single player like runs concepts the Dolphins do. It's like basically a West Coast offense, just with different verbiage. Like everyone runs this stuff. Like no huddle, like Kaepernick's done that. Running a team that's outside zone with some zone reads, like Kaepernick's done that his whole life.
Yeah, literally just came from a team that that ran a lot of those concepts.
It's like Kaepernick's been in the most West Coast offense ever with like Harbaugh. Like he's done it all. So I think it's really weird Kaepernick stuff because like normally a player that's gone to a Super Bowl, like a quarterback that's gone to a Super Bowl, gets like way more leeway. Obviously, like political stuff is kind of taken away that kind of leeway we normally see.
The interesting thing is, I think Miami was very willing to approach him if Cutler said no. That's definitely the vibe I got from them, and it definitely did not look like a situation where it was going to be like Baltimore, which was cowardly in how they approached it. Going public about it, that was disgusting. But
I would say with Kaepernick, there's like more variance, but I think there was more opportunity to be good. I think with Cutler, it's just a 6-7 win team.
Well, and the one thing to consider here too is, like you said, he's not ever been healthy. I mean, this is a guy that's missed at least 1 or 2 games, I think, for like the last 5 years. And again, behind this offensive line, it's not like the one thing I don't like is people acting like this is the best. I saw someone say like this is the best surrounding cast he's had. No. Dude was playing with Martellus Bennett, Matt Forte, Alshon Jeffrey, like he was playing. Yeah, Brandon Marshall. Like he's had some really good teams, and their offensive line was a little bit more mediocre. Like it wasn't good. It definitely wasn't good. I won't say that, but it was at least what Miami has, probably better. He hasn't really played behind a worse offensive line than Miami's trotted out in the last couple of years. I
think people would just like mention the wide receivers when they mention Cutler and just like ignore that he had the best receiving running back we've seen of this generation in Forte.
And then really solid. Yeah, really solid tight end.
Like Forte was a phenomenal like passing threat for.
He also had Cameron Meredith at receiver. And Meredith broke out after Cutler went out. I'm just saying. It's weird that Meredith did better without Cutler than he did with Matt Barkley? Yeah, Matt Barkley brought out the best of Meredith last year. By the way, rest in peace, Cameron Meredith's knees. Horrible injury that he had this preseason. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm not super doomsday about it. I was not a huge fan of it, although I understood it. I would have signed Kaepernick personally. One, because of an age thing, two, because I think of a skill set thing. I think both of those play in Kaepernick's favor. Probably a salary reason too. I think it would have been a better reason. So I kind of get it though, because I understand, like you said, that the NFL is going to favor what they are familiar with every single time. Every single team has continued to show that.
And maybe it was a couple of months before, maybe it changes.
I think so. Yeah, I think possibly too. Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's just more of anything like NFL teams are lazy. They knew him. Like, that's easy to do. We'll do that. And easy doesn't necessarily mean better.
Yeah.
Or is there anything else you wanted to catch up on in regards to training camp, preseason, or Tannehill, Cutler?
I don't think so. I think we we saw a lot of similar things. We hadn't talked before this about a lot of this, so these are a lot of fresh takes to each other. So apologize that some of these takes are 3, 4 weeks old. But it's refreshing to know that we kind of saw the same things in some instances. I'm excited a little bit about the depth of the team. I do think that they're in better depth, especially along like the defensive tackle position. At least they have guys that are playable.
They have free techniques.
Yeah.
Even if they're playing them as nose tackles, they actually have free techniques on the roster. Rather than
like Gottschalk actually did some decent things, which is refreshing. We didn't see that out of backup defensive tackles last year. The defensive ends look pretty wicked as long as they don't give a bunch of snaps to Andre Branch. As soon as they can get to the backups.
Like anyone they paid around 10 million this year is just a terrible decision, in my opinion. Thomas, Branch, Cutler.
Yeah, I'd have liked to see that money. We'll get to the one thing. What do you think Jarvis Landry's future is?
Oh yeah.
I mean, there's no way he's back, right? I mean, there is a way. I'm sorry, there is a way because I did this on Over the Cap. So if you want Jarvis Landry back, here's what you're looking at. I think financially, right now the Dolphins are almost at no cap space for this year, considering the practice squad. They're going to basically be at almost nothing. They're going to have to sign minimum salary players. Next year, they're projected to get like 12 million. They can open about 18 million by cutting Maxwell and Thomas. That's a foregone conclusion that they'll do both, I think, and then possibly another 9 million with James. So I'm going to assume that they're not going to get rid of James yet. I think that's definitely a wait and see situation because right tackles got really expensive this past offseason.
That's why I'm kind of excited about Eric Smith. It's like, it opens the door to that being a possibility.
Same. We need to, as a fan base, if you want Jarvis Landry back, you are really hoping that happens. Because I think that is going to be that, or
you'd rather it be Eric Smith is good than just Jawan James just melts like he has.
Yes. So let's hope that
it's more likely that Jawan James melts. Unfortunately, though,
it is because we see a lot of these tackles that can come in and move really well, never be able to develop from there. I mean, Miami's had him in the past. Sam Brenner, guys like that, like guys who just don't really hit that next level of being able to be an effective starter. But hey, I like taking a chance on guys like that. I'd rather take a chance on guys like that. You just have to kind of get a little lucky. But so for Landry, there's a couple options. They can restructure the shit out of the team, which is probably likely. I mean, they can restructure Tannehill, open like 10 million. They can restructure Sue and basically guarantee the rest of his contract for like another, I think 6 or 10 million, like that. Something like that. And I think they can restructure Pouncey, which is such a Tannenbaum move that I'm almost expecting it since and that would open like another 6 million too. And they're basically guaranteeing all 3 of their contracts for the duration of their deals.
So the interesting thing I thought about the Landry trade rumor was I thought, maybe they're getting away from emotionally investing in public-facing, like, character players. And I think that's what they did with Pouncey. Like, Stephen Ross was like, he's like a popular figure, went to Florida, like he's well-known, everyone knows his name, and at center, that means you're good, maybe. And they paid him like the best center when he is not the best center, I don't think, in any way. I think he's a borderline top 10 center. But they paid him like the best center, partly because of his like personality. Landry is maybe one of the best slot receivers, but I think it's detrimental to an offense when they use him as a number 1 receiver in terms of volume, which Miami have. I don't think there's any way to say he's a top 15, 20 wide receiver in the league, but he's going to get paid like a top 5, 10 receiver, partly because of his outward image and popularity.
T.Y. Hilton deal.
So I was hoping that like that trade rumor was like, okay, we understand that paying him that amount of money, like we did with Pouncey, like he is on the field, he is not worth that. Maybe like off the field, he makes up some of that money, but you have cap restrictions that off the field income do not fix. And now with kind of like their piecing together, trying to be a win now team. I think last year, personally, like I think last year when they made the playoffs, I think Gase in the front office should have been like, okay, this is our opportunity. Like we showed we can win with this kind of like organizational setup. Let's like refresh now whilst we've got like some leeway and we've got like a couple of years whilst we have like fresh playoff run in our mind, and now we can like reboot this rather than, oh, like maybe we can make the playoffs again if we get more veterans. Like that's, I don't think this team is going to compete for a Super Bowl, even with Tannehill, the way it's constructed. And kind of like the decisions like, oh, the Patriots, they didn't spend on guards, so we won't spend on guards, even though they spent more on guards than the Patriots did re-signing Bushrod alone, not to mention Ted Larson's signing. So they didn't spend on guards, but they didn't follow the process in which the Patriots got to not spending on guards, which was they had guards for like 8 years and they drafted loads and loads of guards in the late rounds until they found a couple of guards that could play. It's like you don't just like, okay, this year we won't spend on guards. And no, there's like processes behind all of these things.
Oh, we drafted one guard in 3 years.
Yeah.
So yep, we're set at the position now.
It's like, oh, we'll just cut those 2 guards we drafted and moved around and played at every position on the offensive line. We'll cut those 2 guys, even though they both would still be on rookie deals, and we'll just like play whatever veteran comes.
The funny thing is I think one, this shouldn't have been an issue. This wouldn't have been an issue if they were planning more for the Landry extension. So back when Stills was signed, there was the financial pathway to re-signing Landry and being able to swallow an inflated deal pretty easily. It wouldn't have been difficult. A couple of these deals, honestly, the Thomas deal is right now kind of standing in the way. I think that they could justify it. It's going to stretch you a little bit, but that $6 million that he will open up, you could help alleviate that concern.
And like the Branch, Fade, Harris thing is kind of similar. It's like,
yeah,
they're kind of just doing stuff and there's no plan. It's like, if you're going to spend that much money on Branch for the next 3 years, when you're kind of thinking Wake's going to be around those whole 3 years, why are you drafting a defensive end in the first round? And like you have Fade, who you're keeping as the 5th edge, and you trade for Hayes. Like have a plan. Like decide, okay, we won't go with Hayes. We'll play Fade, see what he is, and like we either give him a contract or we don't.
Like, yeah, and then they shortened Hayes' contract by a year. And I think that was a mutual decision.
The same. It's like
the McDonald deal that made no sense.
It's like
that made no sense to me. Like he's a good player, but you have to pick and choose where you can invest.
And the Koimisi thing's the same, and it's like
they're now invested at literally every position except for DT2 and CB2. Every other position has a fairly significant contract. I guess middle linebacker doesn't, but you're only going to pay 2 linebackers anyway.
They paid for a Sam and a Will.
Yeah.
It's like they play Mike. I mean, it's just ludicrous. Like people were arguing whether Kiko or Timmons would be playing Mike linebacker. McMillan goes out, and now Mike Collins, and one of Timmons and Kiko aren't on the field for 60-70% of the game.
It's so weird, and they guaranteed basically Timmons' second year, which I'm fine with, but I also assume that he would be the middle linebacker. So like when he's not, it's like, oh, that deal looks a lot less attractive now. Because
maybe they change it from preseason, but
I think they will. Yeah, and I think they will. But
it's weird.
But it's just like I think they made their message pretty clear on Landry when they extended McDonald, because that again eats into their cap next year. They're gonna have next to nothing next year unless if they restructure the shit out of this roster, and you don't want that. You don't want an 8-8 team restructured into cap hell. That's not how this is supposed to work. To be honest with you, and this is. There was 2 sides of stuff that came out, okay? They both exist. Michael Lombardi is a guy I've given a lot of shit to. He was right. The Dolphins were definitely taking calls on Jarvis Landry. Can 100% tell you that. They weren't making calls on Jarvis Landry, but they were taking calls on him. And I also think it's true that the Dolphins told him that they're not going to trade him. But I think there's 2 reasons for that. 3 reasons for that. And 2 of them are related. One is the domestic violence issue over his head. There's no way a team would touch him as long as that's hanging over his head. Number 2 is the Sammy Watkins trade. The Sammy Watkins trade kind of killed off whatever market there would be for Landry, because there's not many teams that are going to be willing to re-sign Landry for the deal that he wants and give up a second-round pick and have the need to fill that before free agency next year. It's a very specific list that's going to give up a second-round pick, which I think would have been the cost for Landry. I think Miami would strongly entertain that. I don't know if it gets the deal done, but I think that's where you're really looking at, because Cook's got a first, Watkins got a second. Those are both far superior players to Landry, at least on the field. And I know that there's more to it than that. Injuries, character, heart, I get that. But everything else considered, that probably would have been what Miami needed to get for him. I think especially if the domestic violence issue wasn't there, I think we'd hear more about this. I think the team wouldn't be as take of a hard line as they did, but considering both of those things, especially the domestic violence thing, no one's offering a second for Jarvis Landry right now. Ezekiel Elliott just got suspended 6 games, and there's no video. Now, there's some ugly stuff out there, and I'm not saying he's innocent, but you kind of have to play due process out in all of this. And any team that is interested in Landry has to kind of wait it out and see. So I'll say that about Landry.
Just be seeing like what the market would be for Landry as well, and like how much they have to pay.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, you have to deal with both factors, though. Now, there's multiple levels to it, and there was already enough question marks before the DV incident, and whatever's going to happen with that. Even if nothing happens about that, we've seen players go undrafted or at least go late day 3 because of hints of it. Let alone, it's just the league is inconsistent with it, and it usually sides on punishing the player and killing all value as long as those things are out there. So I will say that I don't know that Landry would be on this team if that DV incident wasn't there, but there would probably be at least more interest from other teams as well. But it's just the cost. The cost is a lot. It's really hard to give up a second-round pick for a player you're going to pay $13 million a year.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's where
you're probably having to take like a bad contract back, and then Miami in a position where they can't really do that. And I know lots of people look at Miami, it's like, oh, they have like this amount of money. They always have like some cap space. They also always have like 10 million dead because they're restructuring and cut players.
You'd probably be looking at, and this is just an example, people were looking at the Browns. Well, the Browns wouldn't do that. The Browns will just wait till next year. They can sign him for free next year. They're not going to give up one of their second-round picks for him because they can just sign him for free.
Yeah.
But, for example, this is what you'd be looking at. You'd be looking at something like Joe Hayden and a 3rd-round or 4th-round pick for Jarvis Landry. And then you're cutting Byron Maxwell.
Yeah.
Then you've
got Joe Hayden.
Right. then you're stuck with a bad contract that's going to cost you more money because you're going to have to release him next year because you're not paying him $11 million. It's just it's a nasty little circle if you get involved with it. So if I'm Miami fans, I'm not optimistic that Landry will be back. They can make it happen, but it's going to come at a really big cost. And usually you can make a lot of cap space very quickly and very easily, but Miami's contracts are not set up that way to where it's going to be painless. There are times when it can be painless, but I would not want this team to go into cap hell for their current structure.
No, and it's just a weird roster, and I don't think they've got much depth. If you just look at the names, their offensive line, second tier is Eric Smith, Asiata, Jake Brindle, Jesse Davis, and Sam Young.
It's all undrafted level talent.
And they're guys who are going to have to play.
And it's not saying that they won't turn out decent. but those are
But
late
there's not
day
much.
3 undrafted type of talent, and it's all new faces for the most
Linebackers
part.
Chase Allen, Ray Malaluga, and Justin March. It looks like,
I mean, none of those 3 are.
and Mike Hull starting. Like,
I don't think 3 of those guys are playable in 2017, for extended snaps. Malaluga was terrible last year.
Yeah,
Absolutely terrible.
It's like kind of an issue that tight end they're gonna have Fasano and Gray next year. Like, I think Gray's like a fine player, but
yeah,
that's not like a reassuring.
Like, I'm okay with that because, like I said, you have to
But
go
if you're
cheap at
going
some
into
positions. But
it's just to bring up, like, if you're retaining Landry, like, at whatever money, and like cutting, say, Branch, Thomas, um, like Maxwell. Like, I think at least for Maxwell, you've got like a replacement built in. But like Faday's going to be a free agent as well. Werner's going to be a free agent as well.
I don't even think they can cut Branch next year.
Yeah, probably not. God, that's such a terrible contract. Yeah, it's like it's going to be pretty ugly. Like, to replace all that depth, or like bring in competition for those places. Like, they'll be struggling to pay for rookie contracts.
And you're doing all that for a third wide receiver. Yeah. And I think that's where the cutoff is. It's like,
in a functional offense, he should be the third.
Yeah, and it sucks because I get it. Like,
and we're not saying Landry's bad. It's just
not at all.
It's really, really good slot receiver. It's just that is a hard player to build an offense around.
And I agree. I think he's the leader of the offense. Like, I will buy into some of that to a certain level. I won't go as deep as most people do, or most of his mega fans will.
Because people say that the same about Pouncey and like.
Right, like you say that about like Tebow, and you can say about like a million players that are part of winning teams. Like, but I'll say that some of it, yes, he is the leader of the team. He is clearly the emotional leader of the offense. Like, there is value to him. It's only if you can afford it, though, and I don't think that this team can afford it. Unfortunately, I mean, they should have been able to, and they're not building themselves to that way. So brace for it now, and the team will be better off if they are able to allocate those resources in a different way.
If he goes, you just play Parker more in the slot as like a big slot, kind of the way Kevin White was drafted in that same year for Chicago for this offense?
I don't know. I kind of like him more. Yeah, I think you more rotate him in. I think this team has the receiver depth to just plug in Carew. Like, I don't think you're going to see a massive difference with the different.
Just Julius Thomas as a slot receiver. Just be smart for once. But I mean, it's not what I mean. We've asked for the team to like play edge players at free technique, and they.
You could even use Damian Williams as a slot receiver, and he's going to bring a lot of what he can do. A lot what Landry does because he breaks tackles. So I mean, and again, he's not the 100% replacement, but if he can be 80% of what, or 70% of what Landry does at $500,000 or 100 or 1.5 million, as opposed to 14 million, I think we'll be okay. Like, I think you'd be okay with that output. So, and receivers super freaking deep every year. I mean, the fact that DeMaurice Stringfellow and Isaiah Ford went undrafted says a lot about that position. Those are good players. Stringfellow just got released by the Jets, by the way. So he's obviously not that great. But it'd be nice if Miami can get him on the practice squad.
I'm surprised people are upset by him being cut. It's like the 4th and 5th receiver for Miami aren't getting any snaps.
No, they're too
wide receiver. So it's like the 6th one is never going to be active. They're not going to see him for 4 years.
It'll be interesting to see if they cut anyone's snaps for. One, if Parker is one of the top 2 snap getters, and 2, if they cut anyone else's snaps for Carew.
For Carew, I don't think they will.
I don't think so either. Not yet, at least.
I don't think they want to take anyone off the field at wide receiver. The fact that they don't want to take Julius Thomas off in 11 personnel when they're having him in line is kind of proof they just want to have like their skill position players set, and like it just seems like even running back they don't really rotate until like late in the game if they have to. I think they like having kind of the same players out there the whole time. And we see that even with the defensive line and like having Phillips play as like a nose tackle and free technique the whole time, and then Godchow playing one technique even though he's a free technique. They have weird things. And, anyway, I think we've talked for long enough. So thank you very much for everyone for listening. Make sure you follow Ian at NFL's Film Study, and you can catch all his in-season content throughout the year there, and draftcentric.weebly.com, Bleacher Report 1000. You can follow the show at MiamiPod, themiamipod.com, iTunes, Stitcher, although it's not iTunes anymore, it's like Apple Podcasts, but that doesn't sound as good to say quickly, or when you've been used to saying it for 3 years. RSS feeds, you know, if you've been listening this long, you've probably listened to us before. But anyway, thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week with week 2 preview of the first game, which is weird. Anyway, stay safe if you're in Florida or anywhere. Horrible stuff happening everywhere. But yeah, try and stay alive, I guess. Goodbye.